Thank you, Ronnie. And we will take a brief break between the second and third lesson. It won't take as long a one. But if you get sleepy while I'm speaking, you need to stand up. Just stand up where you are, and I'll keep preaching, okay? I won't call you out anything or laugh at you much. Where are they going? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. I need to up front thank my friend Mike Baker, who has been at all three of these programs, Free Hall Nashville, and a friend of mine from college days, for some of this material, because some of it's some material he put together a couple of years ago for some lectures at Treat Hardeman, and sent to me when he saw what I was speaking on this program, and I incorporated some of the session 2 and 3 material. Mike, is thanks to you. So if you recognize it, good. If you don't, it just means I made up statistics that fit better for my purposes than yours. Not really. Mike's done a good job with this. It's valuable information. And I'm sure that he would be happy to share it with you if you needed that information. He'd right back there when I left. Well, one of the favorite pastimes, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use terms here, of the liberal left and the radical right of our fellowship, is to paint a picture of gloom and doom. And I hope I've not done that in the first session. I do believe the future is bright. I look at guys that do that and I think how sad to be that person. The liberal left says we're dying and that we can't live unless we drop all matters of opinion we're holding on to. And then they will mix together everything from the use of PowerPoint to instrumental music and worship in one fell swoop. And when I hear that, I want to think they just missed it. One sad individual recently said, a well-known communicator, he said, quote, "We will lose 100% of our children between ages 18 and 25 if we don't change the music of the church." Reminds me of another well-known preacher a few years ago, back in 1982, who said the church he grew up in would not be the same church his children would grow up in. Well, sadly, that's the truth, because his children left the church. It goes on and says, we must change or die. And they just parroting stuff they've heard. They have nothing to base this on except their discontent and their dislike for the beliefs that we hold. Now, there is good news, though. In fact, there's great news. I'm an unapologetic optimist. God was, and God is an optimist, so I think we should be like Him. Some folks can see the cloud with every silver lining, and I choose to believe that God has great things in store for those that love Him and are called according to His purpose, and that the future can be, in fact, bright. A few weeks ago, one of our teenagers spoke on a Monday night, at a Monday night devotional that my associate Jerry Elder puts on in his garage every Monday night. And this teenager said this, 17-year-old boy, "I have great news. God is on the move in the world today. I am optimistic about the future that God holds for us. The number who identify themselves as Christians has nearly quadrupled in the last 100 years. We are a part of the greatest movement in the history of mankind, which is continuing to rapidly spread and change the lives of many people across the earth." I like that kind of spirit. Some of our brethren seem to have a myopic vision. They use terms, and I don't want to do this, so they use terms like, "in our brotherhood," and then they say whatever they want to say. And I sometimes want to say, what brotherhood are you talking about? I mean, the truth is, there are 11,812 churches of Christ that I know of, that studies have found in the United States. And there are somewhere between 25 and 45,000 outside the United States. There are roughly 50,000 congregations of the Lord's people. And most of these guys that say that and then tell us the direction we should be going haven't visited more than 20 or 30 of those churches. And they're telling us how the whole brotherhood is based upon their experience with 20 or 30 churches. That's a pretty dangerous thing to do. I mean, the church is exploding outside the United States. Places like Africa and India and many other countries, and God only knows how many members of His church there are. But where are the ones going that have left? reminded of a few years ago. I had left Hamilton, moved to Nashville, and I got a call back on a Tuesday to come back to Hamilton and do a funeral on a Thursday. An elderly lady had died. And I agreed to go and was happy to go. They had not hired a new preacher, and I knew the lady, and so they asked me, and I didn't know her well, but they didn't have somebody else, so I went back. The next day, Wednesday, I got a phone call. Another person had died, and their funeral was going to be in Tupelo, Mississippi, about 45 minutes between the two, on the same day, on Thursday, and asked if I could do it. Well, I called the funeral home director, Randy Jackson, there in Hamilton. I said, Randy, I've got a funeral at 10 in Tupelo and at 1 here in Hamilton. I'm going to do the funeral graveside, jump in my car, run there, and this was before the days of cell phones. I'm probably going to be late, but you go ahead and start them, and I'll get there probably just a minute or two late, and I'll stand up if I'm late. So sure enough, I was late, ran into the funeral home, grabbed the little clergy card they give you when you go in, slid down, sat down behind that little wall they use in funeral homes to hide preachers for everybody else. I'm not sure why they built that, but it's there. Well, the singer sang, and when they finished singing, I stood up to preach this lady's funeral. And there, sitting on the second row, the third seat to my right, was a lady whose funeral I thought I was preaching. What do you do at a moment like that? I'm reminded of Sunday at Granny White when we had an individual that I was preaching from Philippians chapter 3. I remember it well. And I was turning third and heading toward home in the sermon, and the guy on my right started having a medical emergency. A heart attack. I couldn't tell what it was. The best I could diagnose, standing in the pulpit trying to exegete Philippians chapter 3 and watching him have a heart attack. That was a heart attack. So our first responders came down, pulled him out, set him on them, started doing CPR. And by that time, obviously, nobody was listening to me. It was worse than normal. And so I just thought, well, there's no reason for me to go on. The emergency people will be coming in any minute, and they need to have a clear passage. So I just said, why don't we, as it appears, Brother Hargis is having some issues over here. Let's just sing a song and pray, and we'll dismiss, and that'll let the emergency people get in a little easier today. So the song leader, as soon as I said sing a song, was sitting on the front row, and he pulled his book up real quick. He started flipping through it. He said the first 2 songs I turned to about death and dying. He said I knew those would work. He said the third one I flipped to was Revive Us Again. He thought, yep, that'll do it. Debbie, one of our ladies that day, I think had the line of the day. She said all over the brother today, Church of Christ sang Revive Us Again, and we're the only ones that did anything about it. The guy did fine, and he lived on several more years. I think sometimes we need just a good old version of Revive Us Again. And I pray that every Christian is concerned enough about their fellow Christians, and they will notice and try to encourage those who have left. I get a little disgusted, a little sick when I hear someone ask me about someone who has left the church where I attend 3 to 6 months after they left. Perhaps that's part of the problem. Have our churches become so large that we don't notice when someone leaves? Has our culture become so isolated that we don't realize when somebody is gone? Have we become so invaded by the people around us that we have clustered ourselves in little cocoons and we don't care about people? Are our own feelings about congregations we worship in so eroded that we are not shocked and sad when someone does leave? I find it hard to believe, and even harder to stomach, when someone reports that they've been gone for weeks or months and no one has contacted them. Now, I need to quickly say, there are a lot of people that lie about that. I've had people say, I've been gone for 4 or 5 weeks and nobody contacted me at all. And then I'll find out that not only had I contacted them, but an elder had contacted them, a couple of friends had contacted them, and they just say that. So I'm amazed at that. But I beg all of our churches to do the hard work of caring for each other, making sure we have in place nets to catch people when they begin to fall out or fall away. I remember well my dad saying something like this: the church is a family. Can you imagine little Sally being gone from the dinner table for a week and no one even noticing? Mommy, have you seen Sally lately? No. Little brother, have you seen Sally? Well, I saw her a week or so ago. Maybe it was 2, I don't know. The church is a body. Can you imagine losing a hand and not realizing it was gone? 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Where have they gone falls into 3 distinct categories. Number 1, some have left for another congregation. I mentioned that earlier. I said I'd come back to it. I'm coming back to it now. Well, I believe we need to be concerned anytime an individual leaves our congregation. And we need to continue to evaluate the health of home. If we ever begin to equate attendance at our congregation with faithfulness to the Lord, we reveal a greater interest in building our kingdom than building the Lord's kingdom. There is a sense in which we should care less what congregation of God's people a person worships at, other than if that congregation is doing their best to live faithful to the Lord. But it's not about building our church. It's got to be about building the Lord's church. Our greatest concern must be about the spiritual health of others. And there are times when people can be spiritually healthier at another place with a spiritual mood. And those who preach, most of those who preach at one time or another, have moved, and we moved for a reason. Sometimes it's because we're not given a choice in the matter. But we've got to accept the fact that people sometimes will need to leave our congregation. We need to learn to give autonomy in our congregation more than just lip service. For us to make a matter that is not a matter of fellowship, a matter of fellowship is sinful. And it smacks of denominationalism. Well, what is that? Well, just because a congregation is different doesn't mean it's unsound. Personalities. There's 7 churches written in Revelation. You study those 2 chapters, chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation. You'll learn real quickly. Those congregations had personalities. And there's reasons why you would want to be a part of one and maybe not a part of another. I mean, think about it. Church of Philadelphia. Church with an open door. I like opportunities. I would like there. Church of Ephesus. I'm not sure. They wouldn't stand for a false teacher. But they left the first love. The very concept of autonomy indicates that there will be differences in congregation. And if we look at each other with suspicion, when there is, or we begin to have a lagging attitude of fellowship or have suspicion toward everyone, and we judge them on matters that God has not spoken to, we lose the battle here. And I'll tell you where we lose it most of the time. Most of the time we lose it with our children. We lose our children. You see, they begin to learn, they begin to think on their own, and they begin to learn quickly not to trust us. If we equate a matter of opinion with a matter of obvious doctrine in the Scriptures, or a matter of great importance with a matter of little importance, our children will begin to think we're nothing more than fools. And they will realize that. I've got in my notes here 3 illustrations of that. But here's the sad thing. If I gave you the illustration, some of you would immediately start saying, well, he said that was not a really important matter. He must be a false teacher. You see, we sometimes build up these straw men, and we don't realize that congregations do have personalities. Well, now all that said, we must do everything in our power to keep the local congregation healthy. Brother Willie Collins told me years ago, the strength of the Lord's church is in the local congregation. And sometimes those who leave because of health or lack of a health in a particular local church. I've been at Spring Meadows now. I'll start my 9th year next month, in July. We went from 40 people to 500 people in 5 years. And then in 2 years, we went from 500 people to 275 people. There was an obvious lack of health in some things that were going on in that church. And for us to have been too pig-headed to step back and say, what is causing this? What part do we play in this? It takes a lot of work to keep a body healthy. I'll leave here and I'll drive back home, and this evening, as soon as I get home, the first thing I'll do is I'll go to the gym and I'll run between 5 and 7 miles. This is a Saturday. If I have time, I'll run between 8 and 10. But it'll probably be more like 5 to 7 because that spaghetti was too good at lunch. It takes a lot to keep a body healthy. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of work. We need to discourage church hopping because it rarely leads to spiritual maturity. If that new family that you're so proud of has been to 3 or 4 congregations in your area in a relatively short time, you can be pretty sure that they're probably not going to be much help in building up the body of Christ where you are, and they'll probably leave you before too long too. Second, others have left the Church of Christ to find solace, comfort, acceptance, and sometimes compromise in denominational groups. This should not surprise us. When on one hand, many grew up today in churches where the distinctiveness of the Lord's church was never explained, or on the other were non-essentials were defended with the same vigor as matters of doctrine. We must believe our beliefs, we must preach what we practice. In the survey we did, it was fascinating to see how many who preach at churches that lose most of their young people, who are far to the right of our fellowship, what I consider seminary anyway, but who also stated that they believe we lose many of our young people because the preaching is not strong enough. That doesn't equate. Many head off to churches where they claim a less judgmental spirit. Now listen carefully before we are too harsh. I have to admit, I can be. I can't speak for you, but I can speak for me. And I sometimes am quick to judge the sinner and have bad feelings for him over the sin. Jesus looked over the crowd and had, remember, compassion. He dipped with the one who would betray him and washed his feet. We would not be surprised, or we should not be surprised, as I said earlier, when those who are not Christians behave like they're not Christians. Another group looks for more freedom in worship expression or practices. They're looking for energy or vitality that's sadly missing from some of our congregations. And before we totally sell them out, we should, about this, some have argued the in-truth part of John 4:24, and fathered over to the extreme that they have unwittingly neglected, or at least given the impression of ignoring the in-spirit aspect that Christ demands as a part of our worship. Let me pose a question to you. If it is a sin to worship with a church that does not have the in-truth part of worship right, would it not also be a sin to worship with a church that ignores the in-spirit part of it, that lazily sloths through the worship of our Almighty God, whose services look more like a funeral procession than a resurrection? That looks like they put their service together in the hallway right before the worship service began. I heard Dad talk about a church he visited in Arkansas, where the announcement guy got up to welcome people or make announcements and made announcements. He said, "Charlie's leading singing today." And Charlie said, "I'm not leading singing today. Joe's leading singing." Joe said, "I'm not leading singing. Fred's down to lead singing." And Fred said, "Well, I didn't know I was leading singing. Give me a minute, let me look up the songs." That kind of mentality when it comes to worship is ungodly. Amen. We're there to worship the God of heaven. Now, still others try to find leadership that is less exerting of authority and control. It's hard to see ourselves in this. It's so very hard. It's easy to slip into a leadership style of decision-making that begins to make it look like we think the church belongs to the leaders instead of to Christ. That the church is made up of the elders instead of the people. Elders have authority, biblically. We have to be real careful that we don't lord it over people. Now, the liberal left would say we need to morph into something more like the churches around us. And there's a problem with that. And here's the problem. The churches they want to morph into are dying faster than we're dying. Did you get that? The ones they're wanting us to imitate are dying faster than we're dying. Barna research said that churches of all beliefs are struggling as America becomes a less Christian nation. I'm just giving statistics here. The Methodist Church is averaging losing nearly 100,000 people in their membership every year. And one of the best-known preachers, Adam Hamilton, said, quote, "At the current rate of decline for the last 5 years, we will have less than 50 years of the United Methodist Church left in the United States." The Presbyterian Church is down roughly 500,000 members since 2006. The Episcopal Church lost over 51,000 members in 2011, and while they claim 2 million members, they only have about 650,000 that actually attend. From 1958 to 2008, mainline church membership, this is all churches in America, mainline churches, dropped by more than 1/4 to roughly 20 million people. Some who are hypercritical of Church of Christ are convinced we must soften our views and become more denominational. They miss the fact that the denominations are declining with much more rapidity than we are. Another way to look at this is generations. About 2/3 of the builder generation, those born before 1946, claim to be Christian. Only about 15% of millennials would do the same. They're the largest generation in America's history, with over 80 million members. More than 22% of all Americans never go to church anywhere. Churches are generally losing members. 28% of American adults left the faith of their childhood for another faith. The fastest growing segment, and we'll talk more about this in the third session, is the unaffiliated group. Brand loyalty no longer exists. The neat thing is, I believe that presents a wonderful opportunity for people who believe in and try to practice non-denominational Christianity. People are tired of the denominational hierarchy. One of our challenges is to show there's a difference. That the one Lord, the one faith, the one baptism. They're not many. 14 of the religious bodies in America, of over 1 million members, and only 14 denominational groups, use that term loosely, I guess, have over 1 million members. Church of Christ group 12 on that list. We are the largest in members who actually attend. Maybe we'll say more about that if we have time later. The biggest issue I think that we're facing in this area is the Mac Church community church movement that are compromising the very junction of teaching. And because they're numbers driven, they end up making the fatal mistake of trying to bring God down to man's level. God's just a good old boy. He's just our friend. He's just our neighbor down the street. It's like a singer sang a couple of years ago. What if God was one of us, just a clod like one of us, just someone trying to find their way in the world today? That's not God. Jesus came to show us the Father, to teach us to imitate the Father, to show us how to follow the Father, and ultimately to take us to the Father. In a consumer-driven approach, they draw a crowd each week and put on a show each week, but the fallout level and the retention level is abysmal, and ultimately they burn people out on Christ, and they fail to produce any lifelong committed disciples. Well, we can say a lot about all these groups. But finally, there's a part of our country, the growing part, called the nones. Much has been said lately about the nones. In October 2012, Pew Research Center shook much of the religious world and revealed that 1 in 5 Americans are religiously unaffiliated. The nones now comprise the largest, quote-unquote, church in America. When hurt or disappointed or confused or morally adrift, it's easy just to check out. Interesting thing is that 68% of those who identify themselves as nones, I don't belong to any church, believe in God. They just don't like, quote, the politics of religiosity. Guess what? I don't either. And in one sense, we can grasp the true non-denominational nature of the church. What an open door that is for us with that segment. Others claim they don't believe at all in God. Some of the nones claim they don't believe at all. They're just atheists. But dig a little deeper, and you'll find there's a deeper problem. Most of them don't want to give God a backstage pass to their life. Over 75% of the nons do not believe abortion to be wrong and support same-sex marriage. Some say this group is just more honest than previously checked out parents. You can call it honest if you want to. For some, it's just they don't want God in their lives. They don't fear the Lord anymore. And that should shock us in a culture. That shouldn't shock us in a culture that's increasingly pushed God out of public life and are suspect of people who serve Him zealously. That's who they are. And that's where they're going. We're going to talk in the final session. I think there are 12 points, so it'll be a lot. I'll move quickly about what we can do about all this. Let's take about a 3 to 5 minute break just to kind of stand up break.